Hey guys, this is my fourth weekly feature. This is actually the last part of a video recorded by one of my former students, Braminc, from my Austin camp. This was a beginning part of this video was used as a leak finder on HokieGreg.com, so you can see that part there. It's 40 minutes long, a lot of extended commentary. And then this is like the last 9 minutes of his recording that I'm going to review here. I thought it was an interesting video, a lot of interesting spots, and led to me expanding. Like, I think there was actually like only 11 or 12 minutes of actual gameplay in the video on HokieGreg.com, but there was like 30 minutes of extended commentary. So a lot of interesting spots, and that usually happens with leak finders because it's kind of like a teaching process too. One of the main things that really stood out in the first video was was mainly not taking advantage of limping at short effective stacks versus different player types. Someone that's 3-betting too much, someone that is calling really wide out of position, or just 12, 13 big blinds deep with a hand like Jack-9 off. It's usually going to be best to just limp that versus most players, unless they're just folding an absurd amount out of position. That was one of the big focuses in that video, along with a lot of other stuff. And I would imagine we'll probably get into that some, at least once or twice going into this video, I would guess. So, because it came up quite a bit in the last video. But overall, I thought he played pretty well so far. So we'll see. Since this is a weekly feature, I'll approach it a little bit differently than the HeadsUpSinging.com video and just talk about some of the more basic things that I've already discussed in a lot of my videos on that site. But when early on readless, and this is readless, is a new game versus something we haven't played before, in a hyper, 25 big blinds deep, we probably want to be playing about around 60% of hands out of position versus a min-raise readless. So like that's going to include hands down to like King 4, maybe King 3 off, something like that. A lot of big little suited hands, 10-6 off, 9-6 off. And I think a lot of those hands are hands that a lot of you may fold out of position for whatever reason, thinking that they're not strong enough to play, but really, we just want our call to be better than a fold, and a fold is -1 big blind expectation, so we don't necessarily need the call to be plus EV. We just need it to be better than a fold. And I think a lot of players think in terms of we want every play to be plus EV, and that leads to them having super nitty out of position calling ranges, and then your opponent can just raise 100% from his big blind, his small blind, and pretty much just print EV versus you because you're not playing enough hands. That I think the average player has started to play more hands out of position, but just for any of you that still aren't, you definitely want your big blind VPIP to be at least 55%, but probably closer to 60 or maybe even 65%. So play more hands out of position, and check out Merce's article in the ebook about playing a lot of hands out of position. But that's versus a min-raise. When someone raises bigger than a min-raise, we can correctly play fewer hands because they are risking more to win our big blind. So definitely tightening up our range there. I mean, I probably would have flatted Jack-7 suited, but even that I think is starting to get kind of close too. Standard C-bet here. I'd be C-betting any two on this board. I think it's probably a mistake to play back here, readless. I don't think the average rag check raise is wide. I mean, I think a lot of players start leveling themselves and they're like, I can't have ace-X in his out of position range, but I don't think that's really true. I think that that some players do, and correctly. I mean, they, well, it depends on your raising range, but I think a lot of players do end up having a lot of the weaker ace-X and ace-X suited in their out of position calling range, and then also some players just try to induce with King X because they know that it's going to level you. That with no equity, I don't think it's a good idea to continue, but I just see so many players insist on running bluffs there. And I just don't think it's a very good idea when you're readless. I don't really like the check call on the flop, mainly because we don't really have a lot of options for value on the turn. Like, yeah, it's going to be kind of hard for us to get value on the flop unless he levels himself or has a worse jack or something like that. But, you know, if he has ace high or something like that, he might, you know, think you're bluffing and not be able to fold, all that kind of stuff. But the main problem here is that this just isn't a board that the average reg barrels much at all. That I think we're really just giving free equity to ace and king X. And yeah, I just don't think we're going to get barreled off on this board enough for this to be the right play or max EV. I mean, it's like, as played, I guess. Like, if you flat the flop, I guess that's probably the right way to play it. But yeah, I definitely like a flop check raise. And mainly just because, like, similar to people leveling themselves on ace high boards when you check raise them, people just, they level themselves on paired boards too. And not nearly as much as on ace high boards or anything, but the average player just doesn't like to get check raised. So when you have an opportunity to check raise them, I think it's usually a pretty good idea until you find out it's not a good idea. Like, and there's a more max EV option. So I'm definitely looking to check raise in those spots. And also, like, you know, when someone is c-betting and then shutting down a lot of double barrels like the average player does, you're just not going to get a lot of opportunities to get value from bluffs on future streets, and that's really where our value comes from. Also, you know, like, if we check raise there and he has Jack 10, and he's going to stack off. But if we check call and the turn is a queen or a king or an ace, that's a card that he could very well shut down on. That we might actually end up losing value by flatting. And, you know, not to sound results oriented or anything like that in that kind of situation, but I just don't think there's a lot of times we're going to get barreled by air either. I mean, I definitely don't see it very often on that board. I think your c-bet here is good. I mean, I wouldn't really put any weight into the fact that he check min raised you already. Not too much, at least. I mean, I would definitely still be c-betting there. I think your flat is fine. I mean, he has raised 100% of buttons so far, but that's over 3 or 4 hands now from the small blind. So, again, and I talked about this a lot in the headsupsingo.com video. We can't put too much weight into small sample sizes. Like, what does raising 3 out of 3 or 4 out of 4 buttons really mean? It means it's unlikely that he raises less than 50% of his buttons, probably. But even that's not impossible. But it definitely doesn't mean that he raises 100, and it would be, like, drastically over-adjusting for us to just start 3-bet shoving super wide because he's raising 100%. And this is kind of an extreme example because I know most of you don't adjust that extremely over 6 hands. But I think a lot of you do adjust a little too drastically over maybe 15 or 20 or 25, something like that. That just remember to adjust by combining all your different information. Use population tendencies. What does your average player do? And then combine that with what sample size you have for that frequency so far. So, like, you know, maybe our average player at this stack depth raises his button 15 big blinds deep 55 or 60% of the time. And this guy so far is, just a better example. Let's say he's raised 80% over 15 buttons. That's a pretty high frequency, but it's still only 15 buttons. So we can't treat it as 80%, but it's probably a little bit wider than our population tendency of 55%. So we make the educated guess that his pre-flop raise percentage is somewhere in between, probably 65 or 70% to be safe. And then we base our out of position frequencies, what hands we 3-bet shove, what hands we flat, etc., to that estimation. So it's not so black and white. We don't just use our HUD stat, and we don't just use the population tendency. We combine the two, and we adjust more. We weight our adjusting more towards the HUD stat as the sample size builds, and then get further and further away from the population tendency. And really, like, one way that you can adjust away from the population tendency faster without a large sample size of frequency is showdowns. So, and I talked about this in the other video. You know, like if you get to if you flat out a position, you get to a showdown and you see that the villain who has raised 5 out of 6 buttons so far, he raised 9-2 off, we can be pretty certain at that point that he's raising a huge amount of his buttons, probably like 95% or so, because that's the bottom of his range. But when we're just basing it off frequency, we need to have a sample size, and if we don't have a sample size, we need to use population tendencies. And I think that's really important and something that somewhere that a lot of people are leaking, and it's pretty complicated. It's simple, but it's complicated to think about it first. So I would encourage you to. If he min raises here, I like a 3-bet shove. Like 5-4 suited, you don't need him to be raising 100% or even 80% for it to be good at this stack depth. That even if the frequency is off by some, you know, he's raised 4 out of 4 buttons at that point, 5 out of 5 maybe. Even if his PFR is like 65%, it's going to be good at that stack depth. So there was a situation actually. I'm not going to go back to it just because the hand wasn't that interesting, but the post flop at least. You had Queen 7 off in the small blind, 15 deep, and I think that's another spot where limping is probably going to be better for you. Because at that point, like, we had seen him play a decent amount of hands out of position, and you know, also someone that like another generalization you can make about players is that when they raise a lot of their small blinds, it's pretty rare that they're really nitty out of position too. So it kind of sucks to have to min raise fold a hand like Queen 7. Not that it's like the nut limping hand or anything, but I do think it's a decent hand to limp. I think versus the first open shove, it's probably a good fold. Don't really think I would fold Queen Jack, but it's maybe close. King 10 would probably be a call too, but it's hard to say. I mean, like, we obviously have to treat the open shove and his min raises differently. Like, it's not the same. Oh, so this is an interesting hand in a really close spot. So I'll let you make your decision first. And I was really torn as to what to do pre-flop here. And now that we've seen the flop, we can be results-oriented. I ended up talking to a bunch of different regs about this, both lock regs and stars regs. Whether we should fold pre or we should flat or just 4-bet shove, possibly having some fold equity, or even if we don't have fold equity, we probably don't. Some worse hands being committed that were 3-bet bluffing. Again, I'm reviewing this video. I can't remember. I'll get to this. But it comes down to population tendencies. Like, what do we think the population tendency is for quickly? And I do think this guy 3-bet pretty quickly. Quickly 3-betting from 60 to 150 at this stack depth, because like King 10, like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be good to min raise call versus a lot of people. That our plan was to min raise call, but now when we face a 3-bet of 60 to 150, it's just a very different perceived range. In my opinion, most of the time, it's a pretty strong range. But it kind of depends. Like, was this the first non-all-in size? And I can't remember now. So basically, if this is his standard sizing of 3-betting non-all-in, and he's 3-bet non-all-in before. I know he hasn't at this stack depth, but if he always 3-bets non-all-in from what we've seen, then if we were going to min raise call a jam, then we just need to 4-bet shove. Maybe he's awful and we have a little bit of fold equity, or maybe he's just 3-bet bluffing and he's committed with worse hands. But and I don't remember him 3-bet shoving, so I'm pretty sure they were not all in. But if he had 3-bet shoved twice before or something, and now we face a non-all-in 3-bet, I think the tendency is for that non-all-in 3-bet to be a lot stronger after following some 3-bet shoves. So if I think the population tendency is for it to be stronger, I think that King 10 is a fold. It's just going to be a really strong range, I think. King Queen, King Jack, Ace King, Ace Queen. Like I don't think you see a lot of much weaker stuff than that. And King 10 is going to have a hard time realizing equity against that range. That I prefer a fold. I think probably calling King 10 suited through King Jack suited and maybe 4-bet shoving King Queen, although that's debatable too. That we just need it to be, we need to be realizing equity better than a fold, but it comes down to how we perceive villain's range in this spot. And I think that is pretty specific to different buy-in levels and different sites that, like, on lock, in my opinion, this is an easy fold. And it also comes down to, like I was saying, was he 3-bet shoving or was he not all-in 3-betting? And I mean, I'm not going to go back and look right now, but it's pretty black and white, really, in my opinion, how you respond to it based on what they were. So in talking to other regs, like, some agreed with me here. Some said it's a really easy fold, and then even a few people said, no, like, you see way too many 3-bet bluffs from, you know, a not all-in size committing at the stack depth, and they're going to call a jam. And so I can see it a bunch of different ways, and I think it's an interesting hand that, like, you guys can comment on and debate. So yeah, so I think whatever you do here, it's not going to be, like, horrendous when we don't have great reads. Like, I can't fault you for whatever you do. Like, if you had 4-bet shoved, I'd be cool with it. I think flatting is probably pretty close. Like, I would have folded, but then I would have called King 10 suited. So, yeah. I think it's an interesting hand. It's probably a pretty close spot, like, no matter what you decide to do. But I think it's worth debating. And important to note that it comes down to population tendencies. I think your play here is, I mean, it's really not, like, a huge deal, but I think if you bet 80 or you just jam, I think both of those look weaker than betting 150, a size that we can never be bluffing with. I don't really expect them to check fold very much, but, like, if we want to get looked up as often as possible, considering we have top pair, that's going to be our goal, obviously, then I think we want to look as weak as possible. That, like, betting a size like 70 or something where we could possibly be stabbing at the pot with air, or just jamming some draws or just some air, since he's trying to look weak when he checks or something. Maybe that gets called a little bit lighter, played back a little bit lighter than a non-all-in bet. And, like, I don't think it's a huge deal for this specific situation, but you can apply that thought process to a lot of different situations. And I think you guys, if you think about it, you can probably come up with some examples in your head, probably. So, I mean, I think that it's a really bad check by villain. Like, we're not going to be bluffing in that spot. We shouldn't be. We can't expect very many hands to check fold. And basically when he checks, if we're not going to be bluffing, he's basically just letting us check back our king-queen, our queen-jack or whatever, and realize free equity that we wouldn't be able to realize if he just jammed the flop. All right, hey guys, sorry, I had to pause it real quick. So getting back to the game now, I think there's like 2 minutes left in the video. Yeah, the King 10 hand, I think it's interesting. Like I said, I want to hear what you guys think about it, because I could see it having different answers at different buy-in levels on different sites, like I said. Like, I think really important to note just in analyzing that hand is, like, how a lot of all three decisions there like I can see arguments for folding, calling, and jamming. That like the EV difference isn't that great either way a lot of times. That like, I don't know, I think when someone jams there and they run into queens, they realize that that they realize later that villain's range is really tight. They view it as a huge mistake, but when you think about it versus like the information you had at the time, like you didn't know the guy's range, you just were doing it off the population tendency. And the EV difference between the three options is so small that like a lot of times you just can't put a lot of pressure on yourself to play perfectly, because a lot of the the decisions that you make are just a really small EV difference, and a lot of times it's not even worth evaluating so closely. But I do think with understanding your population tendencies correctly, like that could be a pretty more clear-cut play one way or the other. Like I think on lock for me, it's like a really easy fold, and then other guys were saying that it was like the easiest jam ever because they see too many bluffs. So I can see it a lot of different ways for sure. All these hands, pretty standard though. Like I'm not treating that 3-bet percentage of 30 as like his out of position 3-bet percentage at all. So I'm definitely raising a lot of buttons still, and I think you're doing that correctly here. So pretty standard hands. King 5 would have been a call out of position. Definitely like raising a lot of buttons. I mean, we're not probably raising like, I think we probably raise 85 to 90% right now. Some boring hands to end this video, but overall a lot of interesting hands. All right, yeah, okay. So this is a fun one to end with, just because I really don't like the c-bet size here. Like, we haven't done it yet. We've c-bet 40 into 80 several times. But even if we haven't, like, it's just a board where he's going to have a ton of total air. That I do like c-betting here just to get the spade draws and the 3x and the gut shots and some overfloats and possibly get check raise bluffed and all that kind of stuff. We want to get value from all of that, king highs and everything, ace high. But I don't know. I mean, why? It's not a board where like his out of position calling range is going to hit it very hard. Like I would like this if it was like I don't know, like if we had Jack 10 on 9-8-7, I would like it a lot more because it hits the average out of position calling range a lot more. But there's just way too many hands that are going to fold here. I think you don't get any, you pretty much eliminate the chance of getting bluffed. I think you eliminate the chance of getting floated. That like you're trying to maximize value. That I definitely wouldn't increase your c-bet size in a board that he's going to miss so much. And he actually has check raised you 2 out of 3 times. That like, I would like to not make his radar go off basically by putting a big size out there. That and again, like I think the turn barrel is okay. It's just kind of hard for him to have a hand really. Like that I kind of almost like a little bit smaller size, so maybe we can get like another call out of something. I mean, it's just kind of like the whole line is just narrowing his range so much that like as played it's probably fine. It's just it's pretty hard to imagine that this is the best line, but I think I made my point with that anyways. And definitely interested to see if he calls. So all right, so we got a setup, but yeah, I mean I just don't see the value in increasing the c-bet size. And like I do think it's a good idea sometimes, like I was saying, on the connected boards that people hit a lot, to do that, and I definitely think it's something that a lot of players don't do enough of, probably myself included. I think I autopilot my, or actually I decrease my c-bet size a lot, but I don't increase them enough. But on boards like 7, 8, 9, like there's just so many hands they can have that like even if they're skeptical, they're not going to fold. That I think that's a good idea. But overall, I thought you played pretty well throughout these videos. I mean, a lot of the post flop stuff was all right. Pre-flop was pretty good. I just think you got to limp more and probably just not set yourself up so much. Like, don't play so passively with your value out of position. Be willing to check raise more and just play aggressively, and don't expect your opponents to barrel into you, because it just doesn't happen enough, especially on the board textures doing it for, like the Jack 4-4 and the Ace Jack X in the headsupswing.com video. Overall, interesting stuff, and I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about it. So I will definitely have another one up, actually in just a few days, because I missed last weekend because I was playing live. So should have a decent amount of content up over the next few days. So thanks a lot.